I'm Davy. I'm awesome. And welcome to Davy's Awesome Stories, where I tell funny stories from my past or go on a rant in an effort to make you laugh. But this week it's a little bit different, because I'm not telling a funny story from my past, I'm telling a funny story from somebody else's past. So in last week's Davy's Awesome Stories, I mentioned casually about somebody who used to work at a Betamax store, somebody I used to work with, and told you maybe I'll tell you the story. Well, I decided to seek them out and get their permission, because this isn't my story, this is their story, but it was a funny story. It was somebody I used to work with, and one day we were sitting around and we were talking about the worst places we worked. Now, me and everybody else, we didn't work anywhere weird, we just worked in places with, of course, bad management, terrible customers, terrible coworkers, really bad incentives, really bad conditions, and we were going about that. But then this guy, and I'm going to use his real name because he gave me permission, Marcus, threw out that he actually worked for a place that he couldn't believe even opened. He worked at a video store that exclusively rented Betamax tapes. Now, this guy wasn't really old. He was my age. In fact, that's one thing him and I talked about. We were born very close to each other. I was born at the very end of December 82, and he was born almost in the very beginning of January 83, and we talked about how it does suck having a birthday so close to Christmas. So when he was telling us, I used to work for a video store that rented Betamax. Seems like an odd choice to have. I bet nobody ever went to that section. No. It wasn't a section. The whole store exclusively rented Betamax. What? Yeah, wall-to-wall Betamax. When did you work for this place? Because you're my age. If you were like 16, that would have been 99. So, how did you end up working for a Betamax place? Betamax was gone by 99. Now, when I decided to do a little research for last week's video, I found out that no, Betamax wasn't gone in 99. Just pretty much gone. Like, it turns out you could still find some places that sold or rented Betamax, very few and far in between, and usually in those places there were people who knew they had an audience that would buy them. Or in the internet days, you could go to Sony's website and buy new copies of movies on Betamax up until 2015. Now they don't offer anymore. They have a bunch of backstock Betamax players and blank tapes. You can buy those if you want them and use them. Or you can find a place that is just selling other backstock of those things. Or you can find some websites where the guy will make a bootleg copy for you on Betamax if you really, really want it. But at that point in time, I'd probably only known exactly what Betamax was a couple of years before this story happened. I talked about it in last week's video. My dad had one and a couple of tapes. But for the longest time, I didn't even know what they were. I just knew they were weird-looking tapes and a weird-looking tape player. It was years later I found out, oh, that was a Betamax? I can't remember watching one myself. Even my brother can't remember it, because when I was doing that video, I was like, hey, do you remember the movies he had? The only one I remember is Crocodile Dundee. And my brother said, dude, until you mentioned that one, I didn't even remember that one. And even now, only vaguely because you mentioned it. But here's the thing, me talking to this guy about this place he worked, this was in 2006, 2007-ish. When him and I worked together and talked about this. So by that point, with how scarce Betamax was, it was reasonable to assume that it had just gone out of business. But he did in fact correct me. No, it's still around. It's just here and there you find a very small market. Either that or you can find it on the internet, but there's not a big market for that in California. This was back when I lived in California, but apparently at the time that he worked at this Betamax place, he was living just outside Los Angeles. Everybody else gathered was just laughing. I was asking question after question because I was like, how did this happen? This was boggling my mind. How did somebody have a Betamax store in my lifetime? So, of course, my next question was, how old were you when you worked there? I was 19. 19? So, in 2002, was this just a Betamax store that had been open for a long time and just wouldn't let go? No. I was one of the two first and only employees it ever had. They were just opening. I saw an ad, said a video store was opening, and help wanted. And I was like, I like movies, work at a video store would be cool. Why not? It was only when I was there for my interview that I found out it was for Betamax. And you still work there? I was 19 and they were paying. Good Lord, is it still around? No, I worked there for about 5 months. Then they let me and the only other guy that worked there go because they couldn't afford to keep us. And then they lasted maybe a month later. Honestly, I'm surprised they lasted about 6 months. Me too, because these guys were terrible businessmen. Well, yeah. Obviously, they were terrible businessmen. They opened a Betamax store in 2002, long after Betamax had lost that war. What made them think that they were going to last? Oh my god, they told me in the interview. Trust me, VHS, it's on its way out. I mean, he wasn't wrong. In 2002, VHS was on its way out, but had been on its way out for quite a while at that point. Years before DVDs came out, we all knew that something was going to take over VHS eventually. We just knew it. VHS was a dead technology. There was nothing else they could do with it. So we knew something was coming. If you don't believe me, you could go watch movies that came out way before DVDs were invented, where they're in the future and they're watching movies on little tiny CD discs that look like tiny DVDs now, or that looked like old floppy discs. We figured maybe that was going to be the next thing. When DVDs came out, which I don't remember the exact day, but I remember somewhere around 97, 98-ish, I remember seeing a commercial for them and going like, oh, okay, so it's happening. Great. I'm going to have to end up buying all new movies because I had a huge collection of VHS movies. But again, that was mid to late 90s that DVDs came out. And as they came out, more and more people were buying them. By 2002, VHS was pretty much done. Like, you could still find some new copies at video stores, but you could tell they were only buying them for the people that were refusing to get DVD players, because you'd get a new release and it'd be like 1 or 2 VHS tapes and an entire wall of DVDs. So saying they were on their way out is like saying that your grandpa's on his way out because you unplugged the life support machine. And these DVDs, they're a flash in the pan. They're going to go the way of Laserdisc. Trust me. And once they're gone, which I guarantee you will be soon, people are going to start remembering, oh, Betamax, the superior tape. Let's go back to that. That was my reaction. Yeah, by 2002, it was pretty clear to most people that DVDs were not a flash in the pan. They'd been around for a while, and they were only getting more and more popular. Especially because around 2002 is when the PlayStation 2 came out. So for video gamers, you didn't even have to buy a DVD player. You could watch the DVDs on your gaming console. That was my first DVD player. But that's not the only reason they were bad businessmen. I'm dying to hear this. How else? Well, think about it. It's 2002. We're a store that exclusively rents Betamax, but they did not rent Betamax players. So how were they expecting people to watch these? I asked, and they said, we don't need to rent the players. Once we get more customers and they start spreading it around how great Betamax is, people will start buying them themselves and then come here to rent them. So they were hoping word of mouth from God knows who had a Betamax player still in 2002 was going to get people to buy Betamax players. That's stupid. They should have just rented a couple, so if nothing else, people who are curious might go, hey, I'll rent this and rent that and check it out. Preaching to the choir. Okay, so that leads to my next question. Did anybody in 2002 still have a Betamax player? Very few. In fact, I can still remember exactly how many memberships we had before I was let go. Okay, so those of you who maybe weren't around during video stores, or it's been so long you forgot, when you went to a video store, if you wanted to rent from them, you had to have memberships. It didn't cost anything. I don't know if it ever did, but I'm sure at some point they stopped because nobody would have paid for them because most of them were free. But you had to sign up, basically giving them your telephone number and your address. That way, if you ran off with their rental and stole it, they could try to find you and get it back. And of course, so they could keep record of how long you had it out, so they could issue late fees, which is how they made most of their money. And I get if it wasn't for those, they probably would have had a lot of theft. I mean, heck, my brother once stole a couple of VHS movies from a Goodwill. But I was dying to know the answer to this one. How many memberships did you have? 6. In 5 months, we only had 6 memberships. We got those 6 memberships a week or 2 into being opened and never increased. And I don't imagine those 6 members were renting enough to keep you guys in business. Definitely not. They rented like most people rent. Here and there, they'd come in and rent a movie or two. But the worst thing about it is all of them were so annoying. How so? Every single time any one of them came in, I had to get into the same discussion, one that I ended up having so many times that I could have it now on autopilot, about why Betamax was so superior to VHS. Betamax tapes had 80 more lines of resolution. That was the whole argument every single time. And yet somehow that little argument could get spread out for 30 minutes to an hour every single time. I was dying listening to this. Because I could imagine being in his place, having to listen to people go on and on about that every single time. But then, of course, I did have to ask, like where do they get tapes? Like, they don't even make new Betamax movies anymore. They do. You can get them on the internet. But oddly enough, most of the inventory in the store was from the two owners' private stash. Like their personal copies? Yep. I don't think that's legal. I looked it up later. No, that was not legal. Even today, if I some reason wanted to open a video store of my own, I wouldn't, because I would just lose money. Much as I miss video stores, there's a time you gotta accept, they're gone. But seriously, between me and my brother, if we wanted to open a video store, we've got enough movies. We could easily have plenty of movies for you to rent. But that's not legal. You have to get them from a distributor. Because it turns out the people who are going to let you rent these movies, they want their cut. Duh! But some of the newer titles were bootlegged. Like they had blank Betamax tapes and they would double tape them with new VHS tapes. And then rent them. I didn't have to look that up. That is definitely illegal. That goes with the warning that comes on before every time you watch a movie. So it's probably a good thing that this store didn't succeed. Because they would have gotten sued and lost everything once word had gotten out. Dude, it was such a boring job. There was almost never anything to do. It wasn't like we were getting a bunch of new inventory in every day. I'd go around and clean everything, but I cleaned it all 20 times the day before. So that'd be done in a couple of minutes. So I would just sit there bored, sometimes fall asleep. Because sometimes we would go days without a single customer. And most of the time when a customer would come in, they'd come in, look around, realize that this was all exclusively Betamax, and leave. They didn't let them know from like a sign outside or nothing. No, the name of the store was called Max Videos. And for some reason the owners thought that that would convey to the customers that it was Betamax. No, I would just assume that was somebody's name. You, me, and everyone else. So, there's no moral to this story. That's just funny that somebody would actually try to do that. That'd be like trying to open an 8-track store nowadays. I know some things come back, like vinyl has made a comeback, but even then it still has a niche following. It's not nearly as popular as it was in its heyday. But certain things are just not coming back. Like video stores. I loved and miss video stores very much. But in today's world, with streaming services and stuff, I would never try to open a video store in 2023. You'd have to be dumb. About as dumb as somebody trying to open a Betamax store in 2002. So there you have it. That's my story video this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notifications for when I post new videos, and leave a comment. If you ever encountered a business that was quite as crazy as a Betamax store, please tell me. Love you guys.